CDPR is finally talking about the next update coming to Cyberpunk 2077, that with patch 1.3, this seemingly going to be a rather large-scale update, but even further, we get some teases and hints around DLC news also coming, and it looks like a bunch more is about to be revealed, but in this video, I want to go over what has been said already, give my thoughts and opinions on that, and even some other mysteries or things on the radar. Although there was big news today, in the past few days, a few other pieces of news have popped up and are definitely worth noting. So pretty similar to what they did in the past, CDPR just posted up this kind of in-universe themed news presentation article around a couple of the features coming with patch 1.3. They don't give an exact release date for patch 1.3, but likely at the end of this week or at the end of next week. And to just set the stage here, this is actually a fairly large deal, as the last time we really heard or got anything around this game was almost exactly 2 months ago. That's when the last update shipped, and since then it's kind of been radio silence. So a couple of changes coming with patch 1.3, and to be clear, they actually start this article off by saying these are not the biggest ones and there'll be more to come. So these are not the biggest changes of the update, but it is still interesting. These are the ones they chose to showcase. The first major change is definitely a highly requested one, as they are finally fixing the minimap in cars. You can see by this gameplay, the second V gets in the car, the minimap actually zooms out a bit so then you could more easily see your turns. This is a huge issue. The minimap was too zoomed in, you would miss a turn and then have to slam into a wall or somehow try and turn around to go back and make that turn. And they even have what I think is a fun little quote from an anonymous senior Quadra employee saying, "At first we didn't want to give into these criminals' demands, but that changed after an internal audit. It's confirmed that our own shipments suffer from the same issues, often arriving late or becoming lost entirely. In the end, we decided it was in our best interest to provide the navigation update they were asking for." And this is an interesting one because we know that CDPR was at least somewhat aware that this was a problem. In some videos that were leaked from the pre-release build of the game, you could actually see a more zoomed out minimap, and when you moved around with this, it had a flickering problem. And all of the mods that I know of that fix this already have that exact same flickering problem. So it seems like maybe, or hopefully, CDPR finally fixed that flickering problem. If this releases and that's still an issue, that would be one of the biggest memes ever. Another one they just updated was around the cloud selection. So if you don't recall, this was kind of an issue, I guess, somewhat towards the release of the game. Basically, you're doing this quest where you're looking for Evelyn Parker, you go to clouds, you have to pick a doll to have a visit with. In the original version, they showed you a picture of each of them, but then you just have to pick them based off their name. Many people thought Angel was the female doll, but in reality, Angel's the male. So you saw tons of posts and tons of people accidentally picking the male doll when they really wanted to pick the female doll. So now, as you can see by this video, CDPR are fixing that and actually leaving up each of the dolls' faces with their names so you know which one is male and which one is female when you make your selection. Now in reality with this quest, regardless of whether you pick Sky or Angel, you actually have the exact same experience with either one. It's just if it's a male or a female, it's just a model swap with the same dialogue. And for me, I'm honestly kind of surprised to see this one. I remember accidentally picking the wrong person and actually thinking it was pretty funny, and I feel like that was the prevailing sentiment from a lot of people and a lot of those posts around release when people accidentally picked Angel. But at the end of the day, being more aware of the decision you are making is definitely a good thing, but to me, this just feels extremely secondary, like this was really a non-issue for the overwhelming majority of players. And finally, yes, because there's only 3 things put on display this time around, we got a new and easier way to reset all of your perk points. So previously, the way to reset all of your perk points was you had to go to a Ripper Dock and buy this item known as the Tabula e Rasa, which cost 25,000 eddies, and then you could reset everything. Now, you're actually going to have an option just directly in your inventory to reset all of your spent perks, and it seems like this actually scales based on how many perk points you have spent. So the idea being earlier in a playthrough, let's say you start speccing into one tree and realize, no, that's actually not for me, it'll be relatively cheap and inexpensive to just respec when you only have a few points spent. Otherwise, right now, with the current 52 points spent, it's technically about half as much as just buying a Tabula e Rasa. This is another one where, okay, it's definitely a good change, more player choice, more player autonomy, making this more accessible, but at the same time, I feel like there's another one that wasn't a huge issue for me. I feel like once you kind of get into the mid game, you do have a pretty good source of eddies from several different places. I'm not actually mad to see this addressed or changed, but I think a better version would perhaps just do this perk change, but leave Tabula e Rasa in the game and make it so Tabula e Rasa is the more expensive alternative that will also reset your attributes. That has been a highly requested feature. Of course, you could do it with mods, but just a lot of people have been wanting a feature like that in the game to fully respec your character. I kind of understand why they don't add it from a role-playing perspective, but this is another one where it's like, okay, cool, I guess. Not really a game changer for me though. This wasn't really an issue I had. So with those 3 changes in mind, I will roll back to that statement where they said that these are not the biggest changes and there will be more to come, as at 6 p.m. CEST tomorrow, or noon Eastern time tomorrow, they're going to be doing a live stream where they're going to be talking about quite a few things.
Where we'll be talking live about some new and exciting changes to Cyberpunk 2077, which are coming with patch 1.3, as well as the very first DLCs for the game.
And maybe even more.
So probably many of the other changes with patch 1.3, hopefully with gameplay to actually show them off. We're going to finally be getting news and seemingly release dates for the free DLCs coming for this game, and something else. As far as what that something else is, a lot of people are hoping for expansions, but it also could be something like perhaps the ARG getting more attention or some kind of mention or an update. Perhaps it'll be hidden in the stream. Perhaps it's just wishful thinking from me, but also the next gen upgrade is coming at some point in 2020, so it seems pretty likely that that's what that's in reference to. But there's a few different options as to where they could go with that extra thing. So I find this to be kind of a weird one to evaluate. And it's almost like you don't want to go too hard because we're finding out way more tomorrow. But really at its core, they make it abundantly clear that these are not the biggest changes. But at the same time, they're choosing to highlight these changes. And although the Minimap one is great, really happy to see that finally added, modders did that like 3 weeks after the game came out. And although there were some flickering, it wasn't really that big of an issue. I think most people almost always use those types of mods. I even just covered another mod that does that even better earlier last week. But of course, that doesn't help console players at all. But really with these changes in general, there's nothing really gripping, nothing crazy. Some of the things I would really hope this patch at least starts to address is some of the perks that were a little lackluster, like that throwing knife perk. There's been tons of mods addressing that or improving it, or even the police spawns or police systems getting some more attention, which maybe those are still coming. I just think it would have made a lot more sense for them to show off something like that in this little showcase if it is actually coming, especially because it'll probably get a lot more eyes on that stream tomorrow. So for me at least, I'm definitely not super hopeful that stuff like that will actually end up being a part of this patch, but who knows? You definitely could take the glass half full approach and think, well, if they're getting to issues as small as the Sky Angel decision, maybe that means this patch is really quite comprehensive and going to be a meaty one. I recently heard from a CDPR employee who reached out to me directly and privately that one of the reasons we've been seeing these larger gaps in between patches is CDPR hasn't been crunching as much, or really crunching at all after the first couple of months of 2021. So that may explain a bit as to why we're getting these almost 2-month gap in between patches, while also them not being giant patches like 1.2 was. But there are definitely some other things, like during the video you can see a text from Victor. As far as I could tell, that's actually a new thing. There were some data mines around certain texts a while ago, so maybe that will actually end up being a new feature. That's definitely pretty interesting or exciting, a little bit more on the unique and new feature side. In past interviews we heard how subsequent patches would start adding in new features, or at least it was hinted at that they would start venturing into that outside of just bug fixing. But even further, we know there's at least a couple of other things on the horizon and going on with Cyberpunk 2077 right now. We recently found out that one of the long-running mysteries with this game does seem to have some kind of solution. So I made a full video on the big secret with Cyberpunk 2077, and if you even find this remotely interesting, I highly recommend watching that video. There's a lot of depth to this. But basically, there's a couple of different aspects. On one hand, there's still an ARG that is unsolved for Cyberpunk. This was huge, took a lot of effort. It was a whole pre-release thing, but then when the game came out, the ARG just kind of stopped. It actually stopped a full year before the game came out. Seemingly, it will return at some point, and perhaps it is somehow connected to the in-game mysteries, of which there are two major ones. The first are these interesting statues around Night City that feature the writing FF06B5, or at least some of them have that. These seem to be significant in some way, and perhaps this is even connected to the very bizarre Parallels quest. During this, you get some interesting and mysterious characters. You could actually find several characters wearing the exact same ring, and certainly seems like this is something, perhaps actually setting up one of the expansions or other DLCs, and maybe this is all connected. Well, people kind of hit a wall. They weren't sure where to go with this any further, but we just heard from the dev that this either has a solution already that hasn't been discovered, or perhaps is actually getting a solution relatively soon with one of these DLCs.
This one is one of the memes that the community is like tracking. I think one day, guys, you're going to solve it. I'm positive. I recommend you guys to visit this magnificent website where a lot of how to say it. detectives is working. So yes, yeah, Miles said, Pavel, careful. I'm being very careful. So anyway, let's move on.
And there's been a long-term speculation that perhaps the ARG will continue to tease or promote some of the upcoming expansions or DLCs. So all of this is definitely exciting. And then finally, we know that CDPR is having another earnings call later this month on the 26th. And there's a lot of lingering questions that will likely get addressed here. Obviously comments on the DLCs, but we'll probably hear more about that tomorrow, but perhaps further comments now that they will likely get revealed to some degree. If they could actually speak about the ongoing lawsuits or any details surrounding that. There's recently been a new job listing to come to light that talks about the third-person perspective. This is likely for The Witcher 4, but maybe somebody's going to ask about it. We could get some more clarification if perhaps that could be a feature to eventually come to Cyberpunk, and even just game sales figures in general, seeing how things are going in 2021, and especially after returning to the PlayStation Store. So one way or another, there's definitely a lot of interesting things on the horizon. We have this stream tomorrow. I'll definitely have a video breaking down whatever they talk about, but even further, this earnings call, the actual DLCs, and this update coming out, which are likely to happen either this week or next week. With that said, hopefully you guys found this one informative. As always, again, I thank you all for watching. But with that, I hope to see you all next time. Later.